Welcome to Chapter 4, Socialization, Interaction, and the Self. Have you ever wondered what makes us who we are? What defines our behavior, our values, our ideas? Human nature. Imagine a child was adopted from Guatemala and they were from a Mayan descent. Their family there was living in traditional home with block walls, dirt floor, doing traditional cooking, wearing traditional weavings, having traditional customs and values and beliefs. The child then goes to the United States and learns how to dress differently. They will have different activities. Their beliefs and ideas will be very different. Human nature is developed by our surroundings, our interactions, our people that are involved with us. And this is what we're going to look at a little bit more in this chapter. The next is nature versus nurture. You're going to hear this a lot when you're studying science. Nature versus nurture is genetics versus socialization. In nature's versus nurture, there's one example where it could be pointed out. It was in the 1960s and 70s that Neubauer study of twins and triplets was created. Now, let me first state that this research and study would not be allowed during this time period due to human rights. But during that time period, he had 3 sets of twins and 1 set of triplets that he had adopted out. They were given separated out, so one twin went to one family, one went to the other, and so on. And they were adopted out, and the families that adopted them had no clue that they had a twin or triplet sibling. The scientists asked to follow these families to see the behavior of the child and how their growth was going over time. First off, his study is sealed until 2066 due to the controversy. But over that time period, he had an assistant that also viewed it and wrote a book about what he was doing. The families later found out, based on her book, what was happening. And 2 of the siblings actually found themselves as twins, Paula Bernstein and Elise Shine. They ended up discovering that, yes, as identical twins, they had the same genetics, had similar things that would make them do the same things, the way they reacted on certain things. But they also had, because they grew up in very different environments, the values and ideas they have and their reactions to certain things were very different. They wrote a book called Identical Strangers. It's a memoir of twins separated and reunited. During that time period, they're able to compare and contrast, and they're also able to share what they have experienced and their concerns over this study. It's a great book to look at, and what it does is it does reveal some of the nature versus nurture. While it was an inappropriate study at the time, it still is something that even the twins and triplets are trying to, one, find their siblings, and to explore what has happened with them. The process of socialization is learning values, beliefs, and norms from society, culture, and groups. So we do learn things based around the people and the area and the culture that we're involved with. Take, for example, social isolation. We saw this a lot during the COVID epidemic. We saw there were harms and development and socializing and health issues and mental health and social skills. Many people had to they had to go to classes online, um, even guitar lessons were online. They associated with their friends online, and for some, they didn't see anyone aside from their immediate family for over a year. This can, in fact, be a representative of social isolation. Um, they didn't have friends and increase the risk of being, this can happen when they don't have friends, their increase of being bullied, withdrawn, and mental health challenges. This can happen in schools. There's been a study where there is social isolation, and that's very different from the kids that are just disliked, but these kids just sort of fade away. And so they're exploring more on how to get programs available for those kids. The ones that do well in school, they're not picked on, but they're not included in anything. Self experience is a distinct, real personal identity that separates us from all other people. Self is created and modified through social interaction over the course of time and a lifetime. So, who you interact with, maybe when you're younger, is your immediate family. As you get older, you may interact more with your friends, and a certain group of friends may be very specific. As you go into your college career here, you're going to be interacting around others, and you're going to have different activities. That can be part of it, the change. Maybe you start having your own family, then maybe you become an empty nester or your career has changed. Those can change your interactions and your self identity. The other one is maybe when you get older to the point of maybe you're needing healthcare services, that can change. It's where you are connected and it's the people that you're around that can influence the person that you consider yourself and you identify with. Freud came up with the theory on unconscious mind. In this, he stated that there were three parts of your mind. I like to separate it out and think of it as three children in a family. There's the id. This is the free-spirited child that's out there that has, I want to go do something without thinking of consequences, or they're mad and want to say something to someone without thinking of the results of it. And then there's the ego. That's sort of the middle child that's in the middle of two people, and they're like, this is realistically what would happen if you did that. Let's be not as upset with the other one. They're trying to give a little bit of the free spirit to the superego and trying to give a little bit of the superego's ideas of what we should do to the it. The superego, of course, is the one that has high expectations and care about the way people see them. So maybe this example, they would say, don't misbehave. You represent this family and you're expected to be a leader. We also discuss the work of civilization and disconnects. Psychological makeup of an individual helps create social order. He felt we could redirect our drives or instincts. Some of the times you'll see where children are fighting and they're very into getting into negative activities. One of the ways that's been used is rerouting or redirecting them into a more positive and disciplined activity. This has been done through things such as karate or having the child join a boxing group. Charles Cooley developed the concept of the looking glass. Number one, these are how people perceive you and how you think they perceive you. Number one, how we imagine we look to others. Do we look sad? Do we look outgoing? Do they look at how we are? Um, the next is imagine other people's judgment of us. They don't think I'm smart enough. They think I'm lazy. Um, they think that I'm not pretty enough. Then we start with developing a feeling of ourselves based on our perception of other people's judgments. Maybe you start perceiving that People think you're just lazy and that you're not good enough, and you start thinking that about yourself and start having a negative view of yourself. Society has us have a sense of self, and we're dependent on what others think of us. So sometimes we can have those assumptions and use those towards developing a self based on what we think others are thinking. There's mind, self, and society. Herbert Mead developed the self development concept. He came up with the idea that before age 3, he called this the preparatory stage. It's difficulty distinguishing self. So maybe there's mimicking with children that are under 3 and acting. So if you've ever done peekaboo or stuck your tongue out with a little baby and they do the same thing, or, have the same actions or start talking the same way of you. He's saying that's the preparatory stage where they're copying what others are doing and learning that way. Here's a great question during this time period. Does TV or cartoons also do this? This is a development stage. So that's a thought to ask, does the involvement of television impact that preparatory stage of development? Now, ages 3 till elementary school. This is called the play stage. This is when the kids are dressing up and doing pretend pet play. Maybe they're dressing up as a doctor or a firefighter or maybe a chef, and they've got those little kitchens and they're cooking for you right next to mom or dad. And they're known as taking the particulars of a significant other. So they're watching mom or dad cooking, and that's what they try to implement doing. And that's a way of gaining new purpose, and he's saying that it helps them develop socialization for real life roles. So the imagination there helps develop them for real life by watching what's going on. The next stage of development is the game stage. The game stage is where there is self-awareness increases. So whenever a child starts going to school, they start noticing what others are doing. They start learning about cooperation. In schools, they often start with games and they're organized, and you must take a role in the game and you take that accountability of what your role is. So maybe you're playing on a baseball game and it's your job to be the person that pitches. Everybody's counting on you. The other players at the other bases are checking to see what you're doing, to see if you're going to be throwing a ball a certain way. So students start learning how to watch what others are doing, and they understand and set standards common to social groups, playmates, and see themselves from the viewpoints of others. Mead also shared that there's the I, which is the subject component, and this is the person's experience that has the being a little free spirited, creative, um, not been as socialized as much, doesn't know about the norms with so much. And then there's the me, which is the object component. So this is the part of you that's been taught about how to follow the rules and what's expected of you, and how you're conforming to things you may have learned when you're socialized with others, maybe in school. For example, in school, you don't jump up and yell when you want to say something, you raise your hand. But on the other hand, your spontaneous part of you, the I, is the kind of person that, as you'll see in the picture, just becomes so excited and they'll do daring things. So he's saying there are two parts of you, and they're inseparable and united to form the self you know as dual nature of self. Irving Goffman looked at dramaturgy. One of the things that he wanted to do was, in a micro sense, look at what W.I. Thomas came up with the Thomas theorem. What we see or interact with can lead you to defining a situation within your own reality, using a different approach and view based on the owner of the view of what is happening. Remember that little girl that I talked about that was at Disney World crying, and you saw people making assumptions? Yes, sometimes we all make assumptions, and what are our actions that are related to it? So in this instance, go back to the idea of the little girl crying at Disney World. You're an employee and you see this. In your reality, you see a little girl that's hungry, so you give her a treat. But it could be that she is just tired and hot and itchy in a princess dress. So that would give you an idea of what the Thomas theorem was. There are certain things that have to always occur, such as expressions that are given in this concept. Usually these are verbal and intended. People will say that I didn't mean to say that. Well, what he's saying is they actually meant to say it, they just in that moment. The only time that they don't mean it necessarily is when they're in fear and in pain. So maybe you say something inappropriate when you're in a great deal of pain. The other expressions that are given off, these are nonverbal. The eye roll, the heavy breath, the facial expression. But notice these can be intended or they can be unintended. But still, these are expressions that people can pick up on, and they are given as well. Impression management. An example is a woman is very upset that her boss has made her workload double. Inside, she's angry and tired. But when he comes by to ask how things are going, she smiles and says, "Great. We are acting to meet what is expected." Do people say, "How are you doing?" as a common welcome? Most people just smile and say, "Good," even though they're not. This can be an example of impression management, doing what is expected. Derogatory is the theatrical illusion intended. Other example is posting family photos only. You'll often see people posting family photos of smiling and happy and fun activities, but you never see anything negative, a child crying or screaming, or everyone having a horrible time. This is something where they're putting out what they want people to see. In this section, he's talking about the front. The front is the setting. Maybe it's a classroom, maybe it's a workplace. Then there is the region. That's maybe the decor and the props. This could be an example of maybe desks there, or maybe if it's at a hospital, there is the main seating area. The front makes a difference on how we interact. So maybe the front is the work versus home life is more in the back. So you could see this as an example with a teacher out in public. Elementary school students often think of a teacher as simply that, as a teacher. They don't think of them as people that have families or activities or just the normal person you would see walking out in public. Years ago, when my children were small, we had a time we were at an airport to go to Colorado. We ended up seeing one of their teachers getting ready to board our plane. He was laughing, he was with his friends, they were being a little loud, but my children didn't notice. They ran over to him and thought of him just as their teacher. As they walked away, they noticed him in a different light, and they were rather shocked with this because they had only seen him in one certain place. So, what they saw of the front, the back was more behind the scenes, was the other part of his person that he was. The personal front can be the appearance and the manner and the style you dress, your gender, your race. This can be what people are seeing of you in that sense. So, an example could be a young doctor. When someone sees a young doctor, they simply see him as young. There's the assumption that he's too young, he doesn't have experience, he doesn't know what he's doing, and is he old enough to be a doctor? I've heard these questions before when people meet younger doctors. So this is something that could be where people has developed a personal front based on what someone looks like, their appearance. He also mentioned there's a thing called backstage behavior. This is what's considered behind the scenes. A mom is out in the front stage when she's working out in public, around people, but then maybe it's backstage is where she's at home, out of public eye, with her family in a more different and comfortable environment. So that there are two parts of her behavior. Social construction is to create or invent ourselves based on others' realities. Example, if I go to a very nice restaurant, I might behave very different than in a fast food restaurant. Sociologists have now looked at the postmodern theories of the self. That means that during this time of online, they're looking at the interactions with face to face and how our new challenges are created with more online participation versus in person. An example would be online therapy or dating online without meeting in person. You may not get the true reactions, the true impressions of that person. The person can change the way they look or the way they react. So you may not get the same feeling of face to face because this can be more controlled. Agents of socialization are your social groups, your families, some individuals in your life that provide structured situation, which socialization takes place. So some examples that he went through were family, schools, and peers. He found these were the most at deciding how you were going to learn some of your behaviors. So family, there used to be a commercial back in the 1980s where dad walks in on his son doing drugs and the dad yells, "Where did you learn how to do something like that?" And the kid turns and says, "I learned it from watching you." The dad was surprised by this, and we were all in shock by it. But of course, what it relates to with this is family has a way of teaching us behaviors, enforces views and actions, and we learn that from them, even though many of these learned behaviors are unintentional. Another element was schools. When when students go to school, they learn to sit at a table, maybe not talk loudly, they're supposed to raise their hand, but there are also hidden curriculum like values or behaviors that are unintended. Example, there's the learned behavior of focus and competition. Schools are considered the next extension of people learning behavior. Then there are peers. Peers are people they relate to and engage with and have similar characteristics. Family becomes less as kids get older and peers influence more. So that can create a bond or self-doubt. A peer is not always a friend, but there is a need usually with peers for you to want to fit in. Many betray on values to fit in. So, for example, maybe a kid desperately wants a peer group and might join a gang or do things that are not allowed, like egging someone's house even though they're not supposed to, Or maybe a child sneaks out when they're in their teens and goes out drinking and sneaking out of the house. Those can be things people do to fit in and be socialization with their peers. Another impact is media. An example was I was recently at an event and a teenager came up to a booth and they were selling this very, very expensive chocolate that I had never heard of. It was about the size of a Kit Kat bar, but was $10. I was surprised because they said they saw it on TikTok and they had to taste it. They were influenced by media to spend their own money to taste a small item because it had been represented in the media. Another thing that we're seeing with behavior is the start of often eating disorders. When they look at the media and see girls who are actresses or actors or famous people, and they've suddenly lost all this weight, and the media considers them looking amazing and talks highly of how wonderful they look. This can be the start of many people starting with an eating disorder. But it can, on the other hand, be a reverse with media, and it can cause positive about talking about awareness and issues that involve people as well. Adult socialization, these are new situations and roles constantly changing and causing us to learn new behaviors. An example is becoming a parent and how you interact. They expect certain behavior. The way you see things will likely change. It might replace some of your values and your norms, known as resocialization. A person has a heart attack. The old activities and behavior and sense of self can change. Total institutions, example of military. Who they were is left behind. Their heads are often shaved in the beginning. They are expected to think and act a certain way to conform. The dress, the speak, even the food is changed from who they were from before. A status is a social hierarchy that comes with a set of expectations. Status symbols or head of sales company, there is a contract that sets expectations and goals, or status that others assign you, such as you're the nerdy girl, so maybe you're expected to be, of course, the person that gets all the great grades and everybody can turn to if there's any questions. But there's also an ascribed status, one we are born with and unlikely to change, such as our gender or race. There's also an embodied status, how we see ourselves physically. Achieved status we earn, such as a guitarist. Maybe we've practiced hard and learned how to do that. And then there is also the master status. This status overrides others, where people only notice one thing and make assumptions about you. Social construction of emotions. Sometimes interactions with others affect our emotional response. Example would be role-taking emotions. These are when you have sympathy, shame, and embarrassment that allows us to assume the perspective of another person or group and respond accordingly. You see a Facebook, someone's dog has died. You don't click a happy face. You put care or tears symbol, and sometimes you even say you're sorry. There's also the feeling rules. There's socially constructed norms regarding appropriate feelings and display of emotion. These are determined and influenced by your social surroundings. You don't normally start showing anger and screaming on a plane because that's not determined as acceptable by your social surroundings. You do show usually happiness and calm at Disney because that's social surroundings that are influencing and determining what your emotions should be. In conclusion, your surroundings, your interactions can influence the person you are today. These can be everything from your family to media to the controversy of nature versus nurture. I hope that you will take your time, read the materials, and look at the additional materials provided. Reminder, assignments are due by 11:59 p.m. on Sunday. Allow up to 1 week for grading. We do have a rather large class. Feel free to email me questions. Allow up to 48 hours for a response.